Thank you for joining us from the Habura. We really are totally honored, and it's been a long time coming because we've been such big fans of yours. So we're going to start off with the first question. We want to know what turned you on to Torah observance and what eventually inspired you to write these two books called Ideas on Genesis and Exodus, given your background.
First of all, thank you so much. Please don't call me Hacham, I'm far from it. So please do call me Sina. Really, really honored to be part of a program and initiative that I think is doing a lot of good. And we need more and more podcasts and initiatives like this to spread Judaism that is very much rooted in history, reality, and of course in our chief objective, which is to know God. So first of all, thank you very, very much for having me. With regards to the question, I was raised very traditional background, Persian family, was actually born in Iran, moved to the UK when I was about 3 years old. So people still think I'm in the Mossad because I was born there. And very traditional, Shomer Mitzvot, Shomer Shabbat, as many of the Persians who left Iran and came to the UK are and have been. And my observance really was rooted in the educational system, thank God, that I had in my house. You know, they say if you really want to set an example for your kids, it's not where you send them or the shul visit that you go to, but it's very much how you act as a parent in the home. And I was very lucky and honored to have parents who practiced what they preached, and that was able to provide a really good footing for my development. But it was really university time where I started thinking about Judaism on a more realistic level rather than just on a this is what my parents do level. And university, which for many can be a very jarring experience, for me was jarring but in a positive way, because I was able to actually explore the historical side of Judaism, how things developed, as well as studying science. I had studied biomedical sciences as undergrad, and it was phenomenal to me to be able to sit down and see how the world came to be, how the world is, and the consistency, the patterns that exist. And for me, it really reminded me of that line from, I believe it's Eob, where it says, I look at my flesh and I see God. And it really was something like that, where I was able to see these scientific realities and come closer to the entity behind it all. And the main benefit of it was also the fact that I was able to see how atheism was very, very much a religious position. I was president of the Jewish Society, so we got to spend time with the president of the Atheist Society and societies in and around the religious or comparative religious spaces. And it was as dogmatic as the most religious positions were. So that was very, very interesting to me, because for me, atheism was always a default position. Whenever I spoke with people who were atheists, I just thought, that's just the default. But actually, you need to take a lot of faith in atheism, sometimes more faith than in a religious, in quotation marks, position. And when it was after university, really, after I had graduated, I went to work, got close with a Rav, the chief Sephardi rabbi of the United Kingdom, Chacham Yosef Dweck, also known as Rabbi Joseph Dweck. And he started to make me realize a lot about the history of Sepharad. And I started to go and look into the history of the community that I thought I was from, which was a Sephardi community. And I realized that actually the community is not very much how it was historically. I wanted to see what are the roots of the Mesorah, what are the roots of what happened during the formative years of what we call Sepharad. And I had a very, very rude awakening in that I started to see what our Hachamim were, how our Hachamim taught, and what was the chief objectives of the Jews of the time relative to today. And it was there when I started realizing that, wow, I think we need to write something about this. My father, he's an author of over 15, 16 books, and he kind of embedded in our mind the idea that we should all be writing books as his kids.
What type of book?
So it's varied. He's got about 6 different degrees. So he's written from history to politics to technology.
Wow.
So it's varied, but he was always a professor and a student at the same time. Never went into business really, just a brief stints. But that was really what got me to come up with the idea for Ideas, the 2 books that I published thus far on the parasha, where I said, okay, there's a lot of these hachamim that I'm coming across and their works, but people aren't going to go and read all their books because they're quite difficult. And a lot of them aren't in readable Hebrew or in English. So what if we were able to take some pieces, some quotes, some of their ideas on the different parashiot, and then connect them to ideas from Hachamim of other nations, of the Goyim, and put them together in a book connected to each parasha. And that's when ideas really came to be. But it was specifically a machloket between the Ashkenazim and the Sfaradim in medieval times, which kind of triggered it, which is why, as I'm sure you've seen in the second chapter of my book, I dig into that machloket, because I think that is a really big starting point for a lot of people who, or it should be a starting point for a lot of people who are new to the world of Jewish history.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to get to that. And by the way, everybody who's listening, you must get these books, unbelievable books, and you should raise the prices. Honestly, it's too much. We're giving them a bargain. You know? But anyway, so we're going to get to that point soon. You want to ask your question?
Yeah, we wanted to ask about the Habura. You are the co-founder of the Habura, which is a groundbreaking virtual and physical Beit Midrash with international membership dedicated to striving to know God by embracing the world through the lens of Torah. How did this incredible idea come about, and what can you tell our listeners about the benefits of being part of this movement?
Thank you for bringing that up. So the Habura really began when Rabbi Dweck arrived in the United Kingdom around 7-8 years ago as the senior rabbi of the Sfaradim, in that we had, Rabbi Dweck has Talmidim from all over the world. But in London, as he arrived, he built quite a following of Talmidim here, and we were meeting with him Monday nights in his house and learning. This was separate to the public shiurim and classes that he would give. This is more of an intimate setting where we would dig into ideas and have him teach us. Fast forward a few years, and COVID occurred, and we realized we can't really meet up on Monday nights anymore. This was coupled with the emerging awareness of the classical Sephardi approach of our Hachamim on social media, in different communities around the world. And more students and friends of ours around the world started saying, hey, why don't we just have this hub, this educational hub, which is first and foremost virtual, and get the teachers around the world with the incredible technology that we have, thanks to the developments of the world that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, and start educating, having a curriculum based on the principles, if you like, of this classical Sephardi Masorah. So we partnered up. We were very lucky to get investment from Montefiore Endowment, connected to obviously the Montefiore College, which is one of only 2 or 3 entities in Europe that offer Semicha and Dayanut together, as well as Dangur Education, connected with obviously the S&P Sephardi community here in the UK. And Rabbi Dweck is our Rosh Bet Midrash. We have over 20 teachers, Dayanim, professors, rabbis, female teachers, and over 300 students now around the world who are subscribed members. And then we have a public curriculum as well for our non-members. And the reason why I think it's been a very important initiative, not just for Sephardim, about 40% of our members are Ashkenazim, is that we're living at a time where we have more information than ever. And there's a lot of data. There's a lot of content out there. I mean, we have more Torah content and Torah data than ever before. But the problem is that there's not so much context, and there's not so much framework, and there's not so much of a building of a lens through which you can interpret a lot of this data. So we'll meet some of the smartest people in the Jewish world, lay people as well as Rabbanim, where they a lot of content. They can give you data, bit by bit without any issue. It just rolls off the tongue. But to actually contextualize that data and categorize it and really appreciate, where does this idea come from? Where was it sourced? How has it changed over time? What is our approach to certain foundational things, rather than just the paratim? I think that's what the benefit of the Habura is, in the sense that we have students who, by all means, they study, they go to programs and study in yeshiva and study in their own evening programs every day. That's not what the Habura is here to do, to replace that, but rather it's there to provide this twice a week framework, so that when you're learning all those details in yeshiva, in kola, wherever you are, wherever it is that you are learning by yourself, you can zoom back out to the macro and kind of contextualize a lot of the data that you're getting from other educational initiatives. So that's what we're very proud of, in the fact that, as it says in Sifrei, that the matters of Torah should be in your hands as principles, as klalim, and not as paratim, as details. And that's why our journal is called klalim. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to provide principles, framework, and context to a lot of the Torah content that's out there, in line with, obviously, the classical Sephardi Masorah of Al Hachamim.
I would actually want to add that I spent a considerable amount of time in yeshiva throughout my life. One of the things that I noticed, but kind of it's the type of thing that you notice, but you're not necessarily going to voice out, is actually the lack of context to a lot of what goes on in yeshiva. You mentioned this right now, and it actually just, triggered in my mind. So many things, there's so much detail that is spelled out in yeshiva, but there's very, very, very minimal context, very minimal. You're to the point where a midrash and, pshat in the Torah gets,
No one knows the difference. No one knows the difference. Absolutely.
Understanding the system of halacha, you know what I mean? Like, what the concept of a Beit Din with, just different poskim and, all these different intermingled
Absolutely.
concepts that just becomes like, and
Absolutely.
that I think it's a very important.
And I would add to that, I think one of the reasons why it is like that is very understandable, because you have to remember Judaism has been very much in survive mode, and when you're in survive mode, I don't know if you've seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Of course,
it's something we all learned in school and or in university and college. When you're just about surviving and you've got the basic needs that you need to provide, you don't have time to contextualize and have frameworks and things like that.
Yep.
And unfortunately, Judaism, for much of its galut history, especially in certain corners of the world, we've been in survive mode, especially when you see very much today the educational system. I've come from Iran, arrived in London. My parents aren't going to create a Sephardi yeshiva or a Sephardi school when they arrive here in survive mode from Iran. They're going to send you to the local educational offering, which happens to be Ashkenazi, and with a heavier focus on content rather than context. Why? Because they want to make sure that I survive as a Jew in a few years' time and I'm still Shomer Mitzvot. You don't have time to rationalize and to intellectualize and to contextualize and to provide a framework. And I think what the Hachamim have done in the last, couple of centuries, given the fact that we've been in survive mode, it's as much as we can see now that it's not viable to remain in that content place and we have to contextualize, they provided a big service that we're still even having these discussions about Judaism after all these challenges that we've had as Jews in the world. So we can complain about it now, but what I'd rather do is say, I understand totally where they come from, but I also understand that it's not viable any longer. And we're very much in thrive mode now. Jews, thankfully, we're living in very good conditions, relatively speaking. We have internet, we have Hachamim at our service, and we need to get back to the way of our Hachamim or the way of how many of our Hachamim have been throughout the generations, especially in the Sephardi world.